Of all the videos with the overall title, Why Russia Invaded Ukraine, or What Does Russia Want with Ukraine, the best one I've found, in my opinion, is this one by the YouTube channel Real Life Lore, which I've linked down below. This is one of the few videos that truly gets into the overall geography of Russia and Eastern Europe, which was strategically important to the Soviet Union because they knew it would be difficult to defend that area from invasions. But even better, the video gets into the economic consequences of modern-day Russia's gross domestic product and how it actually has a very low GDP considering its land mass and oil reserves. And the video specifically explains how much of that GDP relies on oil and gas, and how the sanctions on the Nord Stream pipeline have severely hampered Russia's income, as well as the tolls Russia has to pay to the Ukrainian government in order to continue pumping gas and oil into Western Europe. And in order for Putin to stay in power, he needs to secure these pipelines, considering about 40% of Russia's income depends on gas and oil. These seem to be the most logical reasons as to why Putin is invading Ukraine. It's the economy, stupid, and it's not just some madman's romance of empires of the past, and I'm surprised more media outlets aren't simply following the money. Putin needs to secure Russia's income in order to stay in power. After all, no man rules alone, and there are plenty of other people I'm sure would gladly kill Putin in order to take his position. Now, I'm no Russian foreign policy expert, nor a military strategist, but as someone who is being indirectly affected by this humanitarian crisis, I do feel compelled to weigh in on the issue, especially from an angle I'm surprised not more people are talking about. Yet I feel that there is an even more important reason as to why Putin has invaded Ukraine. By the way, this is also why I've chosen to title my video as Putin invading Ukraine, not Russia invading Ukraine. Enough Russian people have expressed that they're against the war in Ukraine, and I'm sure more people would be protesting, but they're understandably frightened. But as the more fundamental reason why Putin invaded Ukraine that I wish I would hear more people talk about is the fact that Putin is a psychopath. And I'm not using the word psychopath to make him sound insane or a madman. Putin is hardly that. He has always seemed to be cold and calculating, even as he berates his own inner circle on Russian national TV. I'm using the word psychopath as, from what I understand it to mean, as defined by actual psychologists and neurologists. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below, but psychopaths are people who are neurologically incapable of empathy towards the suffering of others. In other words, it's more than just a psychological problem. It's more of a hardware problem than a software problem, to use a computer analogy, considering that's basically what our brains are. Which is not to say all psychopaths are serial killers and genocidal dictators, but chances are all serial killers and genocidal dictators are psychopaths. And while I'm well aware I'm not the first person to point this out, especially since I've learned this from listening to other experts, I do feel this particular reason isn't understood or talked enough by other people. And I think this is important because we as humanity need to do a much better job of identifying who these walking, talking human tumors are, because they are, in a sense, spreading societal cancer. They are demonstrably lethal threats to the rest of us, let alone our peace, freedom, and general well-being. And one thing that blinds us to that fact is religion, especially when you consider the religiosity of the Orthodox Russian people and how Putin exploits and weaponizes that faulty tripwire in the rest of our brains. It's not for nothing that even in his contrived, bare-chested photo ops, he makes sure to show he's wearing a cross, which, by the way, is the equivalent of wearing a little electric chair around your neck. And I say this as a former Catholic. It's just amazing the symbols so many human beings choose to respect and revere. But when you think about it, it's not for nothing why so many Christians respect the cross. It's the sign of an ultimate punishment by the state, death. We tend to revere what we fear. And that fear is probably what triggers this faulty mental tripwire in the rest of us, which isn't simply exploited by religiosity and the desire to live forever in an afterlife where some supreme being will make sure everything that was ever wrong in our lives will be corrected for all eternity. That faulty tripwire that leads to religious thinking also leads to many other predictably ruinous ideologies that can be secular and godless, such as communism or even something as seemingly sensible as nationalism. But nationalism, and especially communism, seem to trigger an even more primal instinct, such as tribalism, which can be another counterproductive impulse that sooner betrays us before it benefits us. Religions and communism are bad ideas that blind us to the need to find balance between necessary dynamics such as individualism versus the community, idealism versus pragmatism, and especially the balance between empathy versus tough love, because you can't feel sorry for everyone, especially those who will kill you if you don't kill them first, namely people like Vladimir Putin. And Putin seems to represent, in my humble opinion, the problem with hyper-individualism. We thought that was a drawback to freedom in the United States and the West, which has led to a me mentality, which then leads to vapid, shallow celebrity culture that gives us the likes of people like the Kardashians and a president like Donald Trump who promotes an overall, you're either a winner or a loser national mindset. But apparently that winner-loser binary also happens within nations like Russia and just about any other nation with an autocratic ruler like Putin who will murder his own people and probably his own children just to stay in power and save his own ass. But of course, no man rules alone, and Putin is surrounded by people who are following his orders blindly and fearfully just as much as he is surrounded by people threatening his position of power, which causes him to make moves like the invasion of Ukraine in order to keep his grip on power. However, we need to remember that this is a small group of people in comparison to the thousands, if not millions of people that are negatively affected by their selfish decisions. Just by sheer numbers alone, we should be able to take these people down. Yet people like Putin and his inner circle have managed to secure their power with a nuclear arsenal that could wipe out thousands, if not millions of humans almost instantly. So the trick is, how do we remove people like Putin and his inner circle from power without leaving a vacuum to be filled by the next group of psychopaths? How do we do that with the least amount of collateral damage? Like I said, I'm no foreign policy expert nor a military strategist, but what seems to not be working is the amount of appeasement we are doting on Putin in order for him to not use his nuclear arsenal. And then there's also the morally relativistic false equivalences that we keep using against ourselves when it comes to the United States and the West's invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, or NATO expansion, for example, to keep us from stopping this demonstrable monster. And I know you can't get too emotional either. This is where cooler heads always prevail. Yet cooler heads who are willing to fight, and if necessary kill, they not only prevail, they manage to make the world a better place for themselves and others. They manage to usher in mutually beneficial well-being for as many people possible, as opposed to the mutual assured destruction that we get from the Vladimir Putins of the world. The more I try to inform myself about what is going on with the whole situation in Ukraine, I'm somewhat relieved to see that there is a unified condemnation of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Yet there continues to be a needless divide as to whose fault it is that Putin invaded Ukraine, whether it was NATO pushing the boundaries on Putin or whether Trump could have prevented him if he was still president. The bottom line we need to remember is this is all Putin's fault. It's all on him and his inner circle, but mostly on Putin. Enough Russian people have risked arrest and prison to demonstrate that this is Putin's war, not theirs. And even now, some of the very oligarchs that helped him stay in power because of their own selfishness and greed, even those people are starting to turn on Putin. Like the saying goes, cooler heads always prevail, especially those willing to fight and if necessary kill. After all, that is how Putin managed to get into power and stay there as long as he has. And this is why people of good conscience, people who empathize and want to stop the needless suffering and cruelty of others, we will need to fight sooner rather than later. Or at the very least make some sacrifices now in the short term, such as higher prices for gas or goods, in order to stop our dependence on these monsters who have deftly managed to control and hoard resources for themselves. People like Putin are the reason why we have another age-old saying, which is, kill or be killed. And while it's always best to choose your battles wisely, especially the hill you're willing to die on, Putin is slowly pushing people who want freedom, peace, and human rights. He's pushing those people to those hills. And he's got enough people backing him up on this, more so than his inner circle. He's clearly got dictatorships run by other psychopaths in China, as well as Iran, Syria, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, and of course the Castro regime in Cuba, all backing him up. At some point, those of us who are not murderous psychopaths, those of us who appreciate human rights and freedom and peace and mutually beneficial prosperity, we're going to need to kill in order to survive. That's probably one of the greatest paradoxes we know of, right alongside the only constant in life is change. But that's precisely why sometimes you will need to kill in order to survive. Just like we need to kill other animals in order to eat certain proteins we can't find in plants, and why we need to kill natural diseases and cancerous cells, we need to do the same with people who will kill us if we don't kill them. By the way, I'm in no way, shape, or form trying to promote reckless violence and much less calling for World War III. But for anyone who values their own life, at some point you will need to defend it, and that might require lethal violence. Yet I'm holding out hope for a peaceful resolution to this undeniable humanitarian crisis that can become a threat to us all. But I think we're a few days and thousands of deaths too late for it to be truly peaceful. And I think I'll end this video on that note. A sincere hope for a peaceful end to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And if you want to support my channel, check out the links down below for my original art and merchandise. And thanks for watching.